This is the story of Martin Ellery and his wife Claire Ellery. They had been married for 11 years, and in that time they had built something that looked, from the outside, like a life well constructed. Martin was the kind of man who moved through rooms without announcing himself, careful, observant, possessed of a patience that most people mistook for passivity. Claire was the kind of woman who had always needed to be seen, not out of vanity, but out of something older and deeper. A hunger that marriage had half fed and half starved. The tension between them was not the kind that flares and burns. It was the kind that settles into walls, into the silences between sentences, into the particular way a person learns to stop reaching across the table. What neither of them understood yet was that the distance they had each stopped trying to cross had not disappeared. It had simply been crossed by someone else, and Martin, quiet as he was, had been watching the whole time. They had a routine, and like most routines, it had been assembled so gradually that neither of them could have said exactly when it became more obligation than comfort. Martin woke at 6. He made coffee, one for himself, one for Claire left on the counter, the temperature calibrated to exactly how she liked it, and sat with the financial section of the newspaper. Though he rarely needed it, he already knew what it would say. He had spent the better part of 2 decades learning to read markets the way other men read faces, and he had grown wealthy in the particular way of people who were never photographed doing it. His name did not appear in profiles. His wealth did not announce itself through anything visible. He drove a gray sedan. He wore unremarkable suits. He had learned, deliberately, to seem like nothing. Claire would come down at 7, already dressed, already composed, and she would take the coffee without looking at it. A small thing, and he had stopped noticing that he noticed it. She would run through her day aloud, while she stood at the kitchen island, not because she needed his input, but because speaking helped her think, and he had long served that function. He would listen. He would occasionally respond, and then she would leave, and he would sit for a moment in the sudden quiet of the house and feel, not loneliness exactly, but something adjacent to it. A kind of low-grade awareness that the room had been fuller while she was in it, and that he did not know anymore if that was love or just habit. She worked for Callaway Partners, a mid-sized management consultancy that had been growing aggressively over the past 3 years. Her title was Senior Engagement Manager, and she was good at the work, genuinely good. Claire had always been capable, but the firm's recent momentum had less to do with any one employee's talent than with a series of acquisition decisions made by a silent investment vehicle that nobody in the building had thought to investigate. That vehicle was partially owned by Martin. He had not told her. This was not at first a deliberate omission. He had structured his interests through holding companies for decades, and Claire had never been interested in the mechanics of his work. She knew he did something in private equity. She knew he was successful. But the particular success, the topology of it, she had never asked, and he had never pressed the gift of the information upon her. They had separate accounts. She made her own money. She had always needed to feel like her career was hers, and he had respected that, or at least told himself he was respecting it. He attended the Callaway Partners annual corporate dinner on a Thursday in October because he attended many such events, held interests in many such firms, and because Claire had mentioned it, not as an invitation, exactly, but in the way she sometimes mentioned things, as a fact she was depositing into the air between them. "It's black tie," she had said, and that was all. He came anyway. The event was held at the Meridian Hotel downtown. It was tasteful and expensive and slightly soulless, the way such events always were. Chandeliers, canapes, people performing ease in rented rooms. Martin stood with a drink he didn't particularly want and watched the room with the practiced neutrality of a man who has attended 500 versions of the same evening. He spotted Claire near the bar with a group of colleagues. She was laughing at something, her chin tilted upward, her posture different from how it was at home. Open, lit from within, the way she used to look when they first met. The man closest to her was tall and conventionally handsome in the manner of someone who had decided early in life that this was sufficient. He wore his suit jacket with one button deliberately undone. He kept touching Claire's arm, the elbow, the shoulder, Small calibrated contacts, testing weight, testing welcome. Martin watched. He did not approach. Later, Claire brought him over. "This is David Holst," she said, "my boss." And then, "David, this is Martin." David Holst extended a hand and gave Martin the particular kind of smile a man gives when he has already decided the other man is not a threat. A polite, dismissive thing. His eyes returned to Claire almost before the handshake was finished. "Great to finally meet you," David said, his attention already drifting. "Claire's told me so little about you," he laughed. Claire laughed. The laugh was slightly too easy, Martin thought. Too rehearsed by repetition. Martin smiled and said, "That sounds about right," and excused himself to refresh his drink. He stood at the bar and thought about nothing in particular. He watched the ice dissolve. Across the room, Claire and David were talking again, and she touched his forearm once, briefly, without apparent thought, and did not look in Martin's direction for the rest of the night. The weeks after the dinner rearranged themselves in Martin's memory, not as a sequence of events, but as a texture, a new quality of silence, the way a house can be the same temperature and feel different. Claire began staying late at the office more frequently, and she reported these late nights with the slightly excessive specificity of someone adding detail to preempt questions. The Hendricks account ran long, she would say, or David wanted to finalize the deck before the morning. The name dropped naturally, easily, the way names do when someone has been saying them alone for a while, before they start saying them aloud. Martin did not ask questions. He had a particular understanding of questions, that they can be weapons or they can be admissions of powerlessness, and he was not yet ready to be either. He returned to his own work with a renewed attentiveness. Callaway Partners had been on the periphery of his portfolio for 18 months, a moderately interesting investment, but in November he began examining its internal reports more carefully. What he found was interesting. Certain expense categories were irregular. Certain client billings had been routed in ways that didn't reflect the contractual structures he'd approved. Nothing that announced itself dramatically, but enough to warrant quiet observation. He assigned a small internal audit team the task and said nothing to anyone at the firm. At home, he and Claire moved through their routines with unchanged choreography and slightly altered feeling, like music played at the right tempo with one instrument slightly out of tune. They ate dinner together most nights. They talked about things. Claire showed him a photograph on her phone of a new restaurant she wanted to try, and he said they should go, and they both knew they probably wouldn't for several weeks. One evening, she came home later than usual, and he was already in bed reading, and she moved through the bedroom quietly in the consideration one extends to a sleeping person, even though he was clearly awake. He watched her over his book, the way she moved, that particular tightness of someone carrying something they're not ready to put down. "Good night," he said. Long. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her coat. David's pitching the Mercer restructuring next week. Everyone's stretched. Silence. "You should sleep," she said, and it was almost tender, and he didn't know what to do with that particular tenderness. Whether it was real, or compensation, or both. "You too," he said. She took her coat off. She lay down beside him. After a few minutes she fell asleep, and he lay awake listening to the house and thinking about the way she had laughed at the dinner. Unguarded, warm, pitched slightly higher than her real laugh, and understood that he hadn't heard her laugh like that for a long time, maybe years. He considered the possibility that this was partly his doing. He did not dismiss it. The audit findings arrived in a preliminary summary 2 weeks later. The financial irregularities were more structured than he'd initially assessed, not random, but designed, which suggested interior knowledge of the billing architecture. A small number of employees could have arranged this. The list his analyst produced contained 7 names. Claire's was not among them, but David Holst's was. Second on the list, just below the CFO. Martin sat with this information for a long time. He kept his face very still, which was something he'd always been able to do, and felt the particular sensation of 2 different problems resolving into one, the way certain equations clarify themselves when you finally have all the variables. He did not decide anything that day. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and sat by the window and watched the street, and after a while he went to bed. He chose a Sunday morning when there was nowhere to be. Claire was at the kitchen island with her coffee and her laptop, working on something, and the light was gray and soft through the windows. And it was so ordinary that he felt something close to grief before he had said a word. He sat down across from her, set his own coffee down. She glanced up briefly and then back at the screen. "I need to tell you something," he said. She closed the laptop. There was something in his tone, not anger, nothing that telegraphed itself as danger, but a quality of weight that she recognized, maybe as the opposite of his usual silence. Not an absence of words, but a presence of intention. He told her about the holding company. Not everything, not the audit, not yet, but the basic fact of his investment in Callaway Partners. He watched her face arrange and rearrange itself as the information arrived. "Since when?" she said. "Not a question exactly. I took the position about 2 years before you joined the firm." A pause. "You never told me." "No." She looked at her coffee cup. The morning outside was very quiet. Why now? And here he had to make a decision about how much truth to use. He chose honesty in the shape of incompleteness, because things are happening at the firm that I can't stay outside of anymore. She understood something then. Not all of it, but a shape. He watched it register in the muscles around her eyes. "David," she said. Not a question either, among others. The silence stretched in a way that silences can when both people in the room are trying to determine the weight of what they know, what the other knows, what has not yet been said. "I want to ask you something," Martin said. His voice was quiet and even, and she would later remember that this was the most frightening thing about it, that he had not raised it at all. "And I want you to just answer it, not explain it, not contextualize it. Just answer." She nodded. "Is there something between you and David Holst?" The air changed. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Her face went through something, a calculation that was not only strategic, but also emotional. And Martin could see both happening. And that double visibility was its own form of answer before she spoke. "It isn't," she started. "It's not what you think it is. I'm asking you to answer the question." A breath. "Yes." He nodded once. He looked at the table. He picked up his coffee and took a sip and set it back down with the same care he always used, the same deliberate gentleness with objects that had always been one of his qualities. And Claire watched this gesture and felt, obscurely, that it was aimed at her. "Okay," he said. "Martin, I'm not going to ask you about it. Not today." "That's not." She stopped. Tried again. "I want to explain." "I know you do." He stood. "But I don't think I can hear it right now." He paused at the doorway. "I'm going to go to the office for a while." He left. He did not slam the door. He took his jacket from the hook by the entrance the same way he always did, and he got into his car. And he sat in the driveway for a moment with his hands on the wheel before he drove away. 3 months passed in the way of difficult months, which is to say slowly at their center, and terrifyingly fast in retrospect. Martin moved into the second bedroom. He offered this as a practical measure, and Claire accepted it as one, and they both understood this was a negotiated fiction. He did not file for anything. He did not call a lawyer, or rather he did, quietly, and was advised, and then waited. He was good at waiting. The audit of Callaway Partners concluded formally in December. David Holst was removed from his position pending investigation of financial misconduct. The CFO resigned. The company's board, which included Martin's representatives, brought in new operational leadership. Claire was not implicated in the financial irregularities. The records were clear on this, but the conflict of interest questions her personal relationship with Holst raised were sufficient for her. On position to become complicated, and she accepted a transition package in January. She did not tell Martin the details. She told him she was leaving the firm and exploring other opportunities, and he said he hoped she found what she was looking for, and she looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. something between hurt and the particular resentment of someone who had imagined a more dramatic confrontation and been denied it. She had built a narrative. He understood this. He had watched people do it before, in boardrooms, in personal conversations. The slow construction of a version of events in which one's own choices become logical, even inevitable, in which the other person's failures are given sufficient weight to explain, and if not excuse, then at least contextualize. In Claire's version, Martin had always been absent. Present in body, absent in whatever deeper way she had needed him to show up. This was not entirely false. He knew this. What she was less willing to examine, he thought, was the question of whether David Holst had offered her presence or merely performance, whether she had been seen or simply looked at. He didn't say this. He had stopped, somewhere in those months, needing to say things to her, not out of coldness. He didn't feel cold. He felt sad, in the sustained low way of someone who has been sad for long enough that it has become part of the landscape. He cooked dinner most nights, and she ate it, and they talked about logistics, the house, bills, a broken heating element in the dishwasher. They were, in a strange way, more considerate of each other than they had been in years. The removal of expectation had made them both gentler. And this was its own kind of grief. In February, she had lunch with her sister and came home with something resolved in her expression, some decision freshly made. She was going to move in with her sister for a while, she said. Give them both space to figure out what they wanted. Martin said that sounded reasonable. She paused, clearly having hoped for something else. Don't you have anything to say about that? He thought for a moment. I think you need space to figure out what you want, he said carefully. I think I need the same thing. That doesn't seem unreasonable. You're not going to fight for this. I'm not going to perform fighting for this, he said. That's different. She looked at him for a long time, and he saw in her face something genuinely complicated. Not just the rehearsed hurt, not the narrative, but underneath it something real and frightened. A woman who had not quite expected to arrive here and was only now beginning to understand that she had driven herself. She came back for her remaining things on a Saturday in March, 3 weeks after she'd moved out. Martin had tidied the house without thinking about it and then felt something almost embarrassed when he realized he'd done it. The old reflex, the old care. He made coffee before she arrived. He left a cup on the counter. She moved through the house with a focused efficiency that he recognized as a form of self-protection. She took books from the shelf in the study, winter coats from the hall closet, things from the bathroom that had been hers. She was not cold. She smiled occasionally, briefly, the smile of two people who have decided to be decent to each other despite the evidence. At some point, she stopped in the living room holding a framed photograph. It was from their 5th anniversary, taken somewhere in Portugal. Both of them squinting into afternoon sun, her leaning back into him, his chin resting on the top of her head. They looked happy. They had been happy, or something that at the time they had agreed to call happiness. She held it for a moment, and he let her hold it. I didn't know, she said finally. Not about the photograph, about the firm, about his position, about all of it. I didn't know any of it, who you were there. I know. That's. She put the photograph down, decided against taking it. That bothers me, that I didn't know. You didn't ask, he said. And then, because he wanted to be fair and he had always tried to be fair. But I didn't offer it either. That's true. She looked at him. Why didn't you? He considered the question properly. Because you needed your work to be yours, he said. And I wanted to give you that. But I think, he paused, I think somewhere in there I also just stopped telling you things. Not just that. Other things. And I don't know exactly when that started. The room was quiet. Outside, someone was walking a dog. An ordinary Saturday. I told myself you were just private, she said, that it was just how you were. Her voice was even, not accusatory. But I think I used that to stop trying to get to you. Yes, he said. I think that's probably right. This was the closest they had come, in 11 years, to saying exactly what was true. It arrived too late to change anything, and they both understood this, and neither of them said so. She picked up the bag she'd been filling. She looked around the room once more, the look of someone archiving something. "You'll be all right," she said. "I think so," he said. "You?" She smiled, and this time it was her real smile. Smaller, less performed, the one she used when she wasn't thinking about how she looked. "I don't know yet." She walked to the door. She opened it, and the March air came in, cool and colorless. "The coffee," he said. She looked back. "On the counter. You can take it with you if you want." She looked at him for a moment, at this man she had spent 11 years not quite fully seeing, this quiet, careful, watchful person who had loved her in ways she'd stopped being able to feel. And something passed across her face that she didn't try to name, and he didn't try to name it for her. "Thanks," she said. She took the coffee. She closed the door behind her. Martin stood in the hallway for a while. He looked at the counter where the cup had been. He looked at the photograph still on the shelf. She'd left it, he saw, and wasn't sure what that meant, or whether it meant anything at all. He went to the window and watched her car pull away, and he did not feel victorious, or vindicated, or broken. He felt the particular sensation of a long-held tension finally releasing. Not into relief, exactly, but into a kind of honest emptiness that had its own quality of rest. Outside, the street returned to its ordinary Saturday self. A neighbor pulled into their driveway. 2 children ran across the lawn next door, oblivious and loud. Martin made himself a fresh cup of coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table. He did not open his phone or his laptop or the newspaper. He sat with the quiet, and after a while the quiet began to feel, not like absence, but like space. The kind that, if you were patient enough, and honest enough with yourself about why it exists, you might eventually learn to live inside of.